If there is one thing that we know about the comic book industry more than that we need to support it more in our local comic book stores, it's that Superman is a bit of a big deal. The Big Blue Boy Scout has been around for absolutely ages, and as such has racked up a ton of questionable moments across his tenure. So with this in mind, I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 9 things that DC wants you to forget about Superman. Number 9. Not yet a Superboy, not yet a Superman. Nowadays, we know the younger years of Superman by the name of Smallville, as the Kryptonian orphan was raised by the kindly Ma and Pa Kent, who gave him the Earth name Clark, which is considerably far less cool than Kal-El, but certainly less conspicuous, and indeed they raised him to be a fair, even-handed and well-rounded young man who just happened to be the most powerful being on Earth. And that's the gist of the current comics continuity too, with Child Supes keeping the superheroics to a minimum until he grows up to leave the small Kansas hometown for the bright lights of the big city. In the golden and silver age of comics though, things were slightly different. Between the 40s and as late as the 80s, Superman actually spent his childhood as Superboy, complete with a miniature version of his famous blue and red costume and adventures that were more suited to a pre-teen superhero. Note that this is a completely different Superboy to the totally 90s incarnation, who was an imperfect clone of the original Man of Steel created by Lex Luthor. The old Superboy, meanwhile, had a pet superdog called Krypto. He joined the Legion of Superheroes in the 30th century and made Lex Luthor his enemy while they were still teenagers. All of that, though, was written out of continuity following Crisis on Infinite Earths and has never been undone. Number 8. All of the times that he was a super jerk. When he wasn't enjoying the treasured memories of his superpowered childhood, the adult Superman of the Silver Age took time out of his lifelong commitment to protecting humanity to be a total douche to his friends, peers, and loved ones, just because he could. The 70s escapades of the Man of Steel inspired a whole meta-genre of comics, identified by internet super sleuths as super dickery, and there's so much evidence backing up that title that it's difficult to argue with, and as such these stories are never, ever referred to in the modern era. Being written out of existence by multiple retcons, much like Superboy, has definitely helped speed up that process. Number 7. He doesn't need armor. One of the many things that Superman received in his redesign when DC Comics called a big do-over on their characters with the New 52 was a slightly tweaked costume. Gone were the underpants over the tights, and instead he was decked out in a sleek, cool new blue suit that had a sort of armoured look to it. And that's actually exactly what it was, as explained in Universe in Superman number 7, where Clark's narration reveals that his outfit is a piece of Kryptonian biotech, which, for all intents and purposes, is a suit of armour. Which does make sense, because so far as we know, the population of Krypton doesn't have much in the way of superpowers. It's only with the Earth's yellow sun that Superman's own latent powers were brought to the surface, one of which being his invincibility. On his home planet, the suit that he inherited from his ancestors would have been his only form of defense, and considering that it covers his whole body, would have done a bang-up job. But as Superman on Earth, it makes, well, much less sense. Because he's Superman, he's bulletproof, he can fly faster than the speed of sound, he routinely gets thrown through buildings, and at no point does he suffer anything more than a light scuffing, so why the hell does he need a suit of armor? Fans have argued that his outfit needs to be as impenetrable as himself, since regular clothes wouldn't necessarily take the same amount of abuse that the man beneath them does, but you know what, that does seem like a bit of a weak excuse. Number 6. The one time that he was in a porno. Oh yeah, speaking of Superman being a jerk again, when he wasn't messing Lois and Lana around, he was macking on another guy's wife, and not just some random guy either, but Mr. Miracle of the New Gods. In a spectacularly weird story in the post-crisis Superman title, we were introduced to the porn mogul known as Sleaze, who was already making some pretty decent bank from brainwashing other New Gods Big Barda and making her do sexy dances in sewers, then filming it and selling it on the intergalactic black market. Greedy for more though, Sleaze overextended himself a little and decided that he could get an even higher gross from getting the hypnotized Barda to sleep with Superman, unwittingly inventing the celebrity sex tape. In fact, the tape did get made. Superman really did have sex with Big Barda, wife of superhero Mr. Miracle, but afterwards the pair managed to shake the mind control and put an end to Sleaze's pervy plans, even getting help from Mr. Miracle. So, what happened afterwards? Well, Barda and Soup said that they had foggy memories of what they'd done, but agreed to never speak of it again. And DC had pretty much the same reaction, with the whole story never again being referred to and now presumably being lost in the New 52 reboot. Number 5. Lois Lane and that whole thing. Clark Kent / Superman and Lois Lane were a star-crossed pairing for the ages. The constant romantic confusions as Lois pined for Superman whilst totally dismissing her dorky Daily Planet co-worker without ever realizing that they were one and the same made for the most of the non-costume drama in the comics for the majority of their run. It wasn't until the 90s, in fact, that Lois finally learned for good that Superman was Clark and vice versa. And the pair finally tied the knot. The will they won't they was finally over and fans rejoiced around the world. But in one of the many changes that have since been reversed by DC, because thank Zod for common sense prevailing, the New 52 changed all of that. Like the much maligned One More Day storyline in Marvel, which undid the marriage of Spider-Man and Mary Jane because the editors thought that that's what fans wanted, Lois and Clark's relationship was also nuked. DC then decided that Superman and Wonder Woman should be an item, literally because they're both super strong heroes. For several years, Lois Lane was sidelined as simply just being Clark's journalist colleague who treated him with a little bit more respect but didn't have any inklings of attraction towards him. This was thankfully changed with DC Rebirth, which brought back the old Lois and Superman from New Earth and put them straight into the new continuity, finally conceding defeat that the New 52 changes just didn't give fans the Man of Steel that they knew and actually loved. Number 4. That Superman Returns was ever a thing. Before the barnstorming comeback with X-Men Days of Future Past, director Bryan Singer was languishing in what insiders or film nerds called Hollywood jail. To get sentenced to a term in this penitentiary, a filmmaker needs to make a misstep so spectacular that nobody can ever consider handing them the reins to another film for a good few years. For Singer, this particular misstep was abandoning the X-Men movies that he had made into blockbuster names to go on to make a Superman flick instead. Except it wasn't really a new Superman film and more just a love letter to the first two 70s adaptations of the character. Continuing from where Superman 2 had left off, Singer cast Brandon Routh in the unenviable position of playing the same character as Christopher Reeve without doing a mere impersonation, one of many confusing elements of a very messy movie. It was supposed to be set a couple of years after a film made in 1980, yet was full of modern language, styles and technology. The story was unfocused to say the least. Lois Lane had a kid with another man, moving on whilst Clark was in a self-imposed space exile. The film was so maligned that it is rarely referred to by DC or their parent company Warner Bros, and certainly isn't as well remembered or referenced in the comics as the original Reeve movies. Following Superman Returns, the comics' Clark Kent moved even further away from the simple, idealistic character in that film and closer to the darker, conflicted version which became solidified in the canon with the Man of Steel movie. Number 3. The Time He Died. When it happened, the death of Superman was a pretty big bloody deal, as you imagine it would be both in the DC universe and real life. That's exactly what it was designed to do, to get comics mainstream publicity in the way that it hadn't in years, and the plan paid off. The killing of an American icon became national and even international news, and had people who had never picked up a comic book before rushing to the newsstands to buy a copy of what was sure to be a momentous occasion in pop culture history. Looking back though, it was clear that the marketing angle was cooked up long before the quality of the story was considered. As such, the death of Superman is, if we're being honest, a kind of dud, despite being such a provocative title. And weirdly, the one to claim the supposedly indestructible hero's life isn't Lex Luthor, Brainiac, or any of his other long-time enemies. It was Doomsday, a character who didn't really have any motivation or anything interesting about him. He was just big and tough enough to survive 6 rounds with soup and emerge victorious. Doomsday would be used sparingly in the ensuing decade, although whenever he did show up, it smacked of the creative team being out of any good ideas. For the most part, he was rightly forgotten about, and ever since Superman came back, this moment has kind of been forgotten about. Number 2. The time he came back to life as 2 people and was electric. Something that's spoken of even less than the death of Superman was the eventual, inevitable return of Superman, because it isn't just enough to reassure readers new and old with the resurrection of the Man of Steel, but that they had to dazzle them with something new, something exciting like new powers, because clearly the amassed powers of Superman were not impressive enough on their own. The only thing that could have been better than that would be, electricity or something. So not long after his resurrection, there was a storyline where Sup stopped getting power from the sun, so instead instead started getting them from electricity, and so his powers became electricity-based, and he got an electric blue look, complete with sparks trailing behind him wherever he went. And not content with mucking up the character this much, DC went further with a story inspired by a 1963 story which saw Superman split into two distinct beings, identified by their opposing color schemes, blue and red. Since seeing sense and returning Superman to his usual self, these characters have rarely, if ever, been mentioned at all. And number 1, he used to be a socialist superhero. The world's first modern superhero was created in 1938 by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, a couple of Jewish kids with leftist sympathies after growing up being bullied and otherwise victimized for who they were. So of course, their greatest creation of Superman was a bit of wish fulfillment, a character who could stand up for not only those who had wronged them, but all the perceived wrongs in society at the time. So Superman in his initial appearances wasn't just a passive character who reacted to villainous wrongdoings, he was an active force for change who sought out corruption and oppression and bloody well did something about it. Early issues of Action Comics saw the Man of Steel utilize his powers to put pressure on government officials, making decisions and even laying the smackdown on a husband who beat his wife. This Superman wasn't so much a hero on high-flying adventures and more of a mouthpiece for the team to address some of the imbalances in society at the time. And if that doesn't sound anything like the Superman you see today, that's because it really isn't. Superman still defends the weak, but he does so against enormous superpowered menaces, not from the all-too-real problems that grind people down in the day-to-day. And that's unlikely to return anytime soon. And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 things that DC wants you to forget about Superman. I hope you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comment section below. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me over on Twitter at RetroJ, or you can swing by Live and Let's Dice, is where I do all of my Warhammer and streaming content, and it'd be great to see you over there. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.